Remember when Calvin Klein was one of the biggest obsessions of the fashion world? I do. It was 1968. 60 Minutes debuted on CBS. Funny Girl premiered in theaters. Otis Redding, sitting on the dock of the bay, won him a posthumous Grammy. And Calvin Klein launched his clothing line with childhood friend Barry Schwartz. Calvin Richard Klein was born on November 19, 1942 in the Bronx, New York. His Hungarian father Leo owned a grocery store in Harlem, and his mother Flo stayed home to care for Calvin and his two siblings. He was smack dab in the middle. Flo's mom, Calvin's grandmother, was a seamstress who owned her own tailoring shop, and it was there that Calvin developed his passion for fashion. He took his creative ambitions to the High School of Industrial Arts and then went on to graduate from the Fashion Institute of Technology in 1963. But it was when Barry took over his family's grocery business that he gave Calvin $10,000 to start his label, Calvin Klein Limited. That would be around 94,000 US dollar bills today. Barry wasn't the only childhood friend that Calvin had in his corner, though. His first wife, Jane Center, started dating the future fashion mogul when the pair were in middle school. They were married in 1964 and had their daughter, Marcy, 2 years later in 1966, while the family was still living in Queens. Marcy recalled her parents being artsy and unlike other people's parents. Not quite hippies, but not quite not. But as Calvin launched his own brand and started to gain exposure in department stores, the work ramped up exponentially. He was working 18-hour days and sleeping in his showroom, putting strain on his marriage. His work ethic had earned him millions and won him Coty Awards for women's wear, but by 1974 it had also earned him a divorce. When Calvin was asked about the split, he had said that they were kids who grew in different directions. If you don't grow together, you grow apart. A year later, Calvin became the youngest designer of ready-to-wear ever elected to the Coty Hall of Fame. By the 1980s, Calvin had branched out into ladies' separates as well as menswear and jeans. He also launched the first of many controversial campaigns, that of a 15-year-old Brooke Shields declaring,
"You want to know what comes between me and my Calvins? Nothing."
The following year, he hired 21-year-old Kelly Rector as a design assistant. And by hired, I mean that Kelly had initially been turned down for a job at Calvin Klein and ended up working for Ralph Lauren before meeting Calvin at Studio 54. He called her the following morning and told her that she'd be starting work the next day. The 70s. Kelly helped grow the brand, adapting the brand's men's underwear for women, which helped generate $70 million in 1984. But Kelly wasn't just an employee. She said her whole life changed with Calvin. He would walk into the room and it was just like the lights went on. The movie started every single day. I was just so much more special when he came into the room. The pair fell in love and didn't hide it in the office, with former employees recounting the fact that he fell in love with her and she madly with him. They didn't care who was around. They showed it, kissing and holding each other and having fun and cuddling. 26-year-old Kelly and 44-year-old Calvin married in 1986 while in Rome on a work trip. Kelly Klein wore a silk pencil skirt, matching blazer, and a lace bodice that were all designed by her new husband. And it was during Kelly's tenure that a young Carolyn Bessette rose up the ranks of Calvin Klein, and ultimately where she met her own future husband, John F. Kennedy Jr. And yes, that video is pinned at the top of my profile. But not all was cashmere and silk in Calvin's personal life. In 1988, Calvin entered a rehab center in Minnesota after struggling with alcohol and substance use for years. He was a frequenter of the party scene, huge fan of Studio 54, and also carried the heavy burden of Marcy's 1978 kidnapping on his shoulders. Yes, it was on the morning of February 3rd that a then 11-year-old Marcy was on her way to school when she was lured off a city bus by her former babysitter, Polly Rancy, I'm not even going to look up her name, who told Marcy that her father was sick and in the hospital. Marcy was held for 10 hours before being released after Calvin paid the $100,000 ransom amount. Polly and her half-brother Dominique were arrested and sentenced to 8 to 25 years in prison, which is quite the gap. On top of that, as the recession hit in the mid-80s, Calvin started to feel the squeeze. The company went from making $240 million in 1987 to $197 million in 1990, which dropped another $20 million in the first half of 1991. And I know that sounds like a lot of money, but apart from Calvin's own handsome salary of $4 million a year, the company had also taken on a decent amount of debt. In 1985, they took over the production of their jeans at a cost of $66 million and struggled to make interest payments. The royalties from licensed deals helped keep the company afloat. I still dream of my obsession-scented nail polish top coat, and filled in the gaps where his overpriced jeans were lacking. Brands like J. Crew and The Gap were selling the same type of sportswear that his brand had been at a lower price point. They couldn't compete. In 1992, Calvin Klein reported a debt of almost $55 million and were expected to pay a principal payment of $15.3 million by the end of the year. And this was during a time when they were barely turning a profit. And so Calvin turned to his billionaire friend David Geffen, founder of Geffen Records, who made a $50 million, that's $50, investment in the brand. While he may have been able to salvage his professional life, Calvin's marriage to Kelly ultimately ended in 1996 when the two decided to split. They wouldn't officially divorce until April of 2006. Kelly welcomed a child via surrogate the following year. During their separation, Calvin sold his brand to PVH for around $430 million, with up to $300 million in future royalties. And while he may have retired from the fashion world, he had not retired from making headlines. 20-year-old Nicholas Gruber had arrived in New York looking to break into fashion while still serving in the army. He was discharged 3 months later under Don't Ask, Don't Tell before ending up on the arm of 68-year-old fashion designer Calvin Klein. While the media frothed at the mouth over Calvin dating a man young enough to be his son, those that knew him were unsurprised. Calvin's sexuality had been ambiguous since the beginning, and it was widely known that during his days as a Studio 54 regular, drugs weren't his only vice. Despite throwing Nick a 21st birthday party with the likes of Anna Wintour, Andy Cohen, and Vera Wang, their short relationship was plagued by Calvin's jealousy and Nick's substance use. They lasted for 2 years and even inspired the off-Broadway play Skin Tight about a woman who seeks out her fashion designer dad only to find him at his West Village townhouse with a 21-year-old man named Trey. Idina Menzel, starred in it. Calvin broke up with Nick and took back the $250,000 Bentley Supersport he had gifted the aspiring model. Nick had multiple run-ins with the law, mostly for dealing, before going to rehab. As of 2024, it was reported that he was training to become a firefighter. In 2016, then, 27-year-old model Kevin Baker was spotted oot in a boot with Calvin. The pair were first spotted that spring at the Mint Luxury Conference in Mumbai before vacationing together in the Hamptons and St. Bart's. Calvin, now 84 years old, keeps his relationship with Kevin on the DL. They do share homes in New York and LA. They were recently seen leaving the gym together in Venice, California, which is the only reason why we really know that they're still going strong 10 years on. Look at Calvin keeping his private life private. What a concept. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you liked this one. If you did, please save it and share it with your friends. It really does help spread the good word of the cult. And don't forget to follow me over on the gram, the two of the you, just in case. We never know what's going to happen. I also have a bulletin board over on TikTok here, if that's where you're watching it, if you want to get notified of when I do stuff. Anyway, good day, and may the cult be with you.